Hello and welcome to the Third Sector podcast. I'm Emily Harle.
And I'm Lucinda Rouse. Each week we bring you half an hour of discussion and debate about the important goings-on in the charity world. This week we'll be discussing how charities across the board can effectively engage with younger people, be it their younger generation of service users or their supporters. And Emily, you were the one pushing for us to dedicate an episode to this. Can you please briefly tell us why?
Yes, of course. So youth engagement is a topic that is very close to my heart, especially as a former member and trustee of the youth-led charity, the Scottish Youth Parliament. While some charities are doing excellent work to really reach young people where they are, it can be really easy to fall into the trap of tokenism, meaning some organisations miss out on the value that meaningful engagement and co-creation with young people can bring. There's also a lot of misunderstanding about what young people actually respond to and engage with, resulting in a lot of missed opportunities for charities. So that's why I'm really excited for our discussion today, which will hopefully be a useful intro for any charity looking to reach the younger generation through their campaigns.
Our guest today is Dan Laws, co-chief executive of My Life, My Say, a youth movement that exists to encourage young people to vote and participate in democracy. A standout campaign by the charity was Give an X, which generated a record-breaking almost 500,000 click-throughs to the government's voter registration website ahead of last July's general election. Hi, Dan.
Hi, both. Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
Could you please tell us, how is My Life, My Say meeting young people where they are and kind of stimulating that engagement that you exist to promote in new spaces?
Of course. So My Life, My Say, for those who don't know, is a youth-led charity dedicated to empowering young people through democratic engagement. Now, not only is it, extraordinarily sort of young team, but we have young leaders from across the UK informing our work, both in governance and strategy, the programming, and has really embedded youth voice within it. So I'm really delighted to be here talking to you today. Now, in terms of sort of that youth engagement work, one thing that we're really adamant on is meeting young people where they are. Now, I think civil society and charities have traditionally, created spaces where young people can engage. They've often gone into formal education, which is fantastic, or they've brought young people into places of power. What we're really focused on is, where are young people spending their everyday life? Where are they spending their everyday life? That is a changing piece. And how can we meet them innovatively in those areas? So a really good example of that is digital. So you mentioned the Give an X campaign. One thing we're really adamant to do is create assets designed with young people, and I can go into that process a bit later on, that goes into that digital space where young people are. Another example is our democracy cafes. So whilst other organisations in the youth democracy space may have previously focused all their efforts, 70-80% of their time in formal education, or brought young people into places of power, parliaments, etc., and there absolutely is a space for that work, and it's really vital. What My Life, My Say is really trying to do is identify the places where young people are spending their time elsewhere. So cafes, as the research showed us, that's where a lot of the young people are going, and they feel safe to express their views. So we now turn cafes into hubs of democracy across the UK. Done around 950 since our founding, 80% outside of London. And we really do our research into where young people are spending their time in cafes, which cafes they're going to, and then we'll take it over, give them iced lattes, hot chocolates, matches are now the thing that everyone wants, and we'll use that to then discuss about the issues in their local area. So the key takeaway is meeting young people where they are, and really think about sort of those spaces where they spend in between school and home. And the best place to find out where they are, ask them. And so that's where that youth voice piece becomes really crucial.
I guess, though, if there are charities not directly in the youth space but want to engage with younger people, there is an important consideration there about what it is that you're discussing, which might determine where they want to meet. I'm thinking we spoke a few months ago to the Canal and River Trust about their water safety campaign for teens, and they found through asking them that actually young people wanted to be having conversations about water safety in schools, which they were really surprised by. They thought, we should be on social media, or we should be in the places where they hang out in their spare time. But actually, for that type of engagement and that type of subject and learning experience, actually they wanted to be in schools.
Absolutely. And that's a fantastic piece. I mean, it completely depends on the issues, the topics, the nature of the charity. But the key piece that trust did, which I'm really glad they did, was ask them, where do you want to be having these discussions, and with whom? That bit's really crucial. Often, we'll consult our young people who, sometimes our squad leaders, they're called, we have over 250 sort of across our network across the UK, and that's forever growing. We'll really quickly poll them. We're able to do that, really rapidly, and just say, look, if we're going to hold this discussion, would you rather us do it with a member of parliament, with a mayor, or would you rather feel safer that, doing it in a space with young people, so you get a more authentic voice there that say stuff that they might not be able to say to people in power, and then we'll feed it back. So I think I love that ongoing consultation and being able to create the processes within your charity and within the civil society organisation to be able to rapidly get that feedback back in a way that's not transactional. That's a really exciting piece that I think is moving.
I think a really key part of that is that making sure it's not transactional, because young people really don't respond to that transactional piece, and that's definitely really key. And as very much a youth democracy nerd, I loved hearing about the democracy cafes. Self-proclaimed, but I'm sure everyone I know would probably agree with me. I think when you're talking about the processes for actually getting that feedback, obviously My Life, My Say has those processes sort of built into it. It's really easy for you to just quickly poll people. How can other charities who don't necessarily have that infrastructure begin to create it, to build it, and make sure that they're getting that really meaningful engagement with young people?
That's a really good question. And actually, I think the answer lies in what you mentioned before, right? Which is that transactional piece. I think we both know this as people who have been young advocates and worked with organisations. You can tell instantly the reason why you're in the room. And, never think if you're an organisation with young people that they don't know. They absolutely can tell. And it's a feeling we all experience, whether you are being used as a token, whether you're being there to support the organisation, but are they interested in your authentic voice? One thing that we found is really useful. So My Life, My Say is an organisation. I think this is why sort of young people are really, really taken to us, hopefully, is that we never sort of say, if we go into this room, you've got to say this, X, Y, Z, you've got to wear this, you've got to be on this behaviour, all the rest of it. They're humans. They know how to behave in that sort of setting, and we don't want to patronise them with that tone. But what's really interesting is that sometimes squad leaders will come up to me and they'll go, Dan, what do you want me to say? And that's where being authentic and just being able to, and honest, and just saying, look, as an organisation, it would be super useful if you could mention this or shout out this programme. And they often come to us and they're like, gotcha. Like, they want to do it. Like, we got you. And just being really honest sometimes about that can be useful. Now, in terms of building those processes, building the process is all about community building. I think building that trust with those young people. So we recently, one of the best investments we made as a charity was bringing in a full-time community manager. And we're a small team. So we're a small team of 7, but we really thought that is such a vital investment for us as a charity. So we brought in our community manager who has grown the squad network up, and having that main point of contact, someone who can act as that face to young people, be that friendly face, is really vital. So I'd say to organisations, civil society, don't underestimate that talent and that skill set. I think it's something we don't rate highly enough, is that community building and that those individuals who are behind that community building. And then ensuring that peer-to-peer engagement piece is strong. So not just seeing you and the young person as the key relationship, but knowing that when you bring in those young people, they're all going to be in dialogue with each other too. And so making sure that everyone has accurate information, making sure that you build a community between those peers, and an alumni network in which not only do they go through your program, but then you keep them in touch with the rest of the organisation. So community building is a long-term piece. We're very aware of that. We've been doing it for the past sort of 5 years, but only really put our money where our mouth is, I'd say, in the past 2 to 3 years. And we're already sort of reaping the benefits of that as a civil society organisation. I can't understate that alumni piece enough. If you have people who've gone through the programme, can feed back to you what worked well and what didn't work well, you can then change those processes. But also, those alumni can advise and support the next generation coming in to make it stronger and stronger.
I'd like to move on now to your approach to partnering with corporates. And you have had some really exciting partnerships with some very well-known brands, among them Tinder, the company behind the Lime Bike scheme, Snapchat. I'd like to hear how your approach to working with these companies perhaps differs from a more traditional corporate partnership model.
Absolutely. And this is the part that I love to get really geeky about. I was head of partnerships last year, sort of during that campaign, whilst project managing the Give an X campaign. And we knew that when the election came, that this is a real moment for the organisation. We're a pretty small organisation, but as you'll know, sort of the youth democracy space, the whole landscape was in quite a difficult place in terms of funding. And so what we thought was, okay, this is time for innovation now. Often when a part of the sector has their back against the wall, that is the time to innovate and think about how do we reach young people differently. And the main way we did that was through exciting partnerships. We knew as a small charity of 7, we're never going to be able to reach mass scale without working with other organisations. And the key thing we did, once again, was have a steering group. And that steering group were fully paid. 8 out of 10 of that steering group weren't registered to vote. They were all young people aged between 18 to 24. Now, the reason we were adamant that we wanted young people who weren't registered to vote is that that was our target audience. We absolutely needed to try and get young people who weren't registered to vote telling us where they were and how we could reach them. And when it came to the partnership strategy, we really listened to them closely. And we'd had some really good relationships in the past at My Life, My Say that we, of course, onboarded moving forward. But a lot of these were new ones. And so the way we would go about it is we'd ask our steering group, who are the brands? If you could draw up a list of 20 dream brands that we could work with as an organisation, who would they be? And so they draw up the list. I would then take that away, see who we knew, take that forward, but also never underestimate when we approach those brands and said, young people who themselves advised us that they want us to work with you. That holds a lot of weight, and that you'll at least get the meeting. And that for us was crucial. As soon as we could get the meeting, we could then make the pitch. And as a charity working in the run-up to the election, our main pitch was this, was that youth and democracy is such a vital topic that brands cannot ignore. Young people are more focused and switched on than ever politically. More importantly, they want to see brands switch on in terms of social justice. They want to see brands show that they care about young people, about the next generation, and that they're socially switched on. But also, we're very aware that brands have a risk appetite and that they might not want to go certain steps forward. But youth and democracy and participating in voter registration and turnout is a really safe bet. It's not risky, and I think that was the main argument we had to put forward, and I think we managed to do really well. That's everything from showing sort of our non-partisanship status as a charity, our sort of risk assessments and what we do in certain situations, and really lucky that we got that trust. So we worked with some amazing brands, worked with Tinder, worked with Snapchat, worked with Lime and Ben & Jerry's and so many more. And what those relationships entailed was us working directly with their marketing teams or their CSR teams and thinking of creative ways we can embed our work with the brand. So a really important piece to this isn't having a fixed partnership offer. It's having a menu of options. So we presented a menu of options to them, and part of the offer was working with our team to think of a creative way to engage young people. So knowing our expertise in this as a youth democracy charity. So we would offer our staff time for free to work with the brands and think of a really creative way to engage young people. And I think that's where they really came in. So I know that Snapchat, for example, were an extraordinary team to work with. They loved the branding. And that branding was really fresh and really new because it was all youth-led designed and it was all co-created. But we would then work with them in creating assets that would then have mass appeal. And so I think it was acknowledging your expertise as a charity, what is your value add? And there are so many value adds in terms of skill set and knowing your audience, pitching that to the brands, showing that it's safe and sort of demonstrating that risk appetite and that you can manage it. And then thirdly, going out to that audience and showing that, you know, you can also bring in an audience for them. And knowing that that is the way that relationship works is really exciting.
So top line for each, what was it that the partnership culminated in terms of getting that message out about the need to vote?
Snapchat did a really good push notification. Now that for us was the gold mine. I would much rather spend a lot of time working with those massive brands. In terms of time investment, the value add is huge because they did a push notification to all UK users in that age bracket, saying that today's the voter registration deadline day. We're working with My Life, My Say to get voter registrations, remind you to register to vote. And that was on the deadline day for National Voter Registration Day, which we coordinate each year. And then on the actual election day itself, it used our messaging that we tried and tested saying, don't sit on the sidelines, go out and vote. And that for us was huge because that outreach was mega. It's the most used social media app amongst Generation Z. And so knowing that and working with them closely was great. They also had a really creative lens, which is like Give an X about different issues that you could use. So again, a really creative way that young people will notice because they're using that app. Tinder was another really creative way. So what Tinder did was they had a swipe card and it said, the hottest date yet, general election, 4th of July, make sure you're registered to vote. Now, what would happen is if you swiped left on that, it would take you to our website, which had the big register to vote link. And that's where the click-throughs went mega. So that partnership was really crucial. Ben and Jerry's, the political parties all had their battle buses touring the country. We had an ice cream van touring the country. So we would go to, we went to Northwest, West Midlands with a mega ice cream van. We'd got our sort of comms really spot on with that, which of course you couldn't say, here's an ice cream if you registered to vote. That's just, we'd worked really closely with the Electoral Commission just to make sure we got that dialogue correct. But what you could do is, for example, work with Ben and Jerry's. They'd have the free ice cream ready to go. And what we could then do is, whilst people were in the line or when they came up, tell them about the importance of democracy and engagement. And so that piece was really crucial as well. So really doing our research beforehand, what you can and what you can't do, and then using those brands as a really big excitement catalyst to then talk about the issues that you really care about. And all those partners that I sort of just mentioned there, and there were so many more, like Lime, who had on the front of their bikes in all the areas they operate in, they had register to vote signs on the front of their bikes. They also did a push notification as well, which is fantastic. It's got huge usership amongst our age group. The staff there absolutely loved working on it, and they're staying in touch with us for future work. They loved working on it because, again, it was working on a social cause that they really cared about in a really creative way. And if you can get them with that creativity, that becomes really exciting.
Do you think that some charities just more generally are potentially missing out on these really, really valuable brand partnerships because they're afraid that partnering with certain brands might be too risky?
I think so. And I'm in constant dialogue with the sector and youth sector and democracy sector. And one thing that I always mention is, of course, you can do this in a way that puts risk and safeguarding right at the forefront. That is so important for you as a charity, and we're very aware of that. So that all comes into creating a really good partnership risk framework that we have as a charity. Your sort of audience are really important here. We are in constant dialogue with our young people about which brands they want us to use, because not only do you have a potential risk, and I understand this, of what the collaboration with the brand looks like, but you also have the risk of your audience potentially switching off instead of switching on. And that dialogue with young people becomes really important. But I don't think we've got an option. I think charities have to start working closer with brands, because that's where people are, and brands is such a broad term for small businesses, big businesses. That collaboration becomes really important. One thing that I'm really keen for, I think, the sector to do more of is that design thinking and creativity. One thing that I absolutely adore is seeing on LinkedIn or other sector platforms unusual creative partnerships. There are so many partnerships waiting to be built in a creative way that I don't think we're tapping into. A load of businesses who want to support but just don't know how. And I think that's where the talent in the partnership building team, but also in sort of your creative members of the team, becomes really important, because they might be able to see a collaboration that isn't instantly, recognizable. So Tinder's a really good example of a collaboration that absolutely fulfilled our charitable mission and really increased impact in a really innovative way, but isn't automatically thought of as the natural collaboration. So one thing I'd really encourage charities to do is design thinking. So having a think in terms of, and this is where the leadership becomes really important, creating a space, workshopping ideas that may seem sort of completely beyond the realms of possibility, and not shooting them down, saying yes, and okay, this is a really good idea, and then we could do this, and then we could do this. That is how the Ben & Jerry's ice cream van, My Life, My Say Battle Bus was built, was through design thinking. So I can't recommend that enough, and really encourage other sort of CEOs to look at that model of thinking.
And on the topic of creative partnerships, it's not just about the brands, it's also about the people. I understand that you've been doing a lot of successful work with influencers. Could you tell me a bit about that?
Absolutely. This, I think, is a really growing piece of our work, and we're really excited to sort of be investing more time and energy into. So it basically came from, again, speaking to young people and knowing as a charity that political messages are changing. And not just political messages, but messages to our audience. And as a charity, we have to adapt to that, because it used to traditionally be civil society speaking to young people, or civil society informing schools who then go to young people, right? That used to be sort of the framework. But now you have so many other messengers directing their messaging to young people that we have to now sort of work with. And it was the piece that during the Give and X campaign, I think people were really interested to see how it would go. I won't lie to you, we had quite a lot of people in the sector really skeptical of it. I got quite a bit of sort of pushback about using influencers, but we don't regret it one bit because the impact was huge. Now, all of this comes down to building relationship with talent. And I think there's often this misconception that only the bigger players in the sector can afford that talent and therefore can use them. You often see them on the red carpets at events, those big sort of influencer names. Don't underestimate the talent between like sort of 100K to 1 million followers who have a huge platform, and they've often built their platform with a very sort of dedicated sort of following sort of about social issues. And those issues can be really, and that audience can be really interesting when sort of tapped into. So one thing we did was we had an extraordinary talent called Sharon Gafka. She's amazing. She's worked with us really closely on so many different topics before, and we were very fortunate she came on board instantly sort of onto the campaign. And what that meant was it was then a safe bet for other influencers to come on. And so that first influencer is really crucial in building that relationship. We then would work closely with them to realize who their audience was and what sort of messengers did they want to get to. We didn't provide everyone with the same briefing pack because we know each talent is very different and they want to also reach their audience in an effective way. But there's a similar thing to the brands here, which is they also want to talk about social justice issues. Influencers are also under pressure and have expectations from their audience to show that they're socially aware and that they care about the issues that young people care about. And they also have a risk appetite that charities are really well placed to navigate. So as a charity, what we would do is we'd work with them, we'd show them the messaging that we've tried and tested. That bit's really crucial. We'd show them the data, we'd show them there's really good take up. And we'd also share assets with them, which looked cool. And again, that bit, don't underestimate that bit. Having assets that people want to share is really exciting. And so that Give an X sort of, it almost looked like Nike-esque, right? It wasn't, those assets aren't your traditional voter registration assets with like information and education and inform yourself, that sort of vibe. It was different and people could tell it looked different and it was youth-led and co-created. And that meant influencers wanted to share it. Now, I completely understand why charities have been skeptical in the past. Again, like risk appetite is I'd say even bigger. Then the threshold is different a little bit to brands when working with influencers and talent, but it's really doable and it becomes really exciting when you can onboard them as sort of ambassadors for the charity. You've got a lot of influencers who want to do this. They want to work with charities, and I think making sure that your team is skilled up in working with that talent is going to become even more crucial as they become bigger messengers to the audience that you're working with.
Absolutely. That's so interesting. And I think you're definitely right about tapping into these new ways of engaging with audiences, particularly on social media. It's something that doesn't really get talked about enough. And especially with influencers, I mean, even just scrolling through my feed, I'll see the same faces over and over again. And I can imagine that if they were to be promoting a charity campaign, I would take notice.
Absolutely. And I think, that bit's really important, right? Which is that when we talk about politics and we talk about democracy, one thing that My Life, My Say is trying to do is show that it's for all young people. Now, there's a place for politicians to have that dialogue with young people, but when it's coming from an influencer who you don't instantly think their first thing is politics, that messaging becomes really powerful. I really distinctly remember. So Next Gen Conference is our sort of biggest conference each year. It's our staple event. Around 700 young people each year come and take over an iconic London venue, talk about youth and democracy. It's growing every year. I remember one year walking around with, in the morning, the mayor, Sadiq Khan, and in the afternoon, sort of Max Belegde, who was the TikTok influencer star. They both generated sort of the same reception. The mayor, Sadiq Khan, has been the biggest sort of supporter, and we were really grateful that he came to speak. But like Max, even I knew Max and I knew sort of the work that he'd done. But then walking around with him, you saw that reception from young people. They absolutely, they took to him so quickly. They wanted to hear what he had to say, and he generated that interest. And he could then use his platform for social good. And I think it was in that moment, that day, I truly sort of recognized that power of influencer relationships. And then on the Give an X, sort of on election day, when we really did the push out to go out and vote, we found out that influencers really wanted to say something about go out and vote, but they didn't have the mechanism to say it, which is why Give an X then became really important. And we sent it to all the agencies. We said, look, please do if your talent wants to do this, talk to us. We can work with you on framing that messaging correctly. Sure enough, Ellie Goulding, Little Mix, so Lewis Hamilton did a retweet. Like, we managed to get some really impressive talent. Amelia de Moldenberg from Chicken Shop Dates, pushing that messaging out that directly reached our audience in a really effective way.
And one thing that I found really interesting about that campaign was that it wasn't My Life, My Say, the charity whose brand was at the forefront. It was very much the Give an X and that brand, which obviously was really exciting as well to those influencers, to those celebrities. At what point did you make the decision that we're not going to push the charity's identity at the forefront of this and actually give all of the space to the campaign brand?
Absolutely. And it was really interesting. Often I've sort of walked around conferences and people talk about Give an X, and then I go, oh, I'm from My Life, My Say. And the two things wouldn't necessarily always connect, of like, oh, wait, you coordinated that?
You're Give an X.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was a really interesting model that we took as an organization. And it was a decision very much rooted in the fact that we are a small charity, right? We are, people often think we're much bigger than we are. We are literally 7 staff. And we knew that for the impact that we wanted to have, we'd have to build a movement. Now, I think there's a real big difference between a campaign and a movement that's really important to talk about. A campaign is, I think, much more structured. It's much more, here's a very specific goal, and here's the organization coordinating it, sometimes in partnership. A movement is throwing out branding, throwing out messaging, and having maybe some core organizations behind it, maybe sort of the chief organization coordinating it, but then creating something and putting it out in the world that other people can jump in on. And that for us was what Give an X, it actually started out a campaign and it became bigger and bigger and bigger, that we realized, right, what the really important thing here is to let it go a little bit. And as soon as you let it go a little bit, it became into a movement. Now, what did that look like? So you had My Life, My Say, you had the creative expertise of Shape History coming in as well, digital comms company, and then you had the I Will movement as well, which is a collective of around 6,000 organisations across the UK pushing for social change and ensuring that young people participate in volunteering. Now, what that meant was when the 3 of us pushed it out as organisations with very different expertise under the Give an X banner, every organisation under the sun gives an X about something, whether that is thinking about child poverty, whether that's giving an X about the climate, whether it's giving an X about the housing crisis. So what they could do is turn that into their public affairs strategy as well, and they could push it out. We give an X about XYZ, therefore go and vote. And so knowing, who we are as a charity, that we have, huge skill sets, really talented, we're punching above our weight for sure, but we are small and we can't do this alone, was really important, sort of checking ourselves there. And then realizing that we want to build a movement to have huge scale meant that branding had to take the forefront. And also there was an element of it was really strong. It would have been a disservice to have not used it in the way we did. And what I'm really excited about now is building on that coalition. So one thing I'm very much sort of intending to do is create that, sort of solidifying that Give an X coalition that we had, solidifying it, creating sort of structures in place so that we're ready next election, the election after, to do that movement building again, because those relationships with all the different brands become really crucial. We can't just lose them. And then in 2029, whether it's me, whether it's someone else, we can't have them having to do that whole process all over again, because that's when we sort of lose those connections. So yeah, it's really exciting.
There's a lot of innovation happening here. And you previously mentioned that at the time that you were doing this campaign, during the lead up to the general election, the youth democracy space was struggling. We saw the British Youth Council collapse last year, and there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment in terms of what funding in the youth space looks like, etc. Is there anything that you think youth charities specifically need to be doing differently to maintain their sustainability while also keeping the youth-led element and still embedding that co-creation? Absolutely.
No, I'm really glad you raised this. It is, and just to express sort of solidarity with other sort of youth sector organisations out there, it's really tough. The funding landscape is really difficult. And I've seen sort of, first and foremost, the youth democracy sector be really squeezed. Like you mentioned, sort of the British Youth Council last year, an organisation was incredibly close to my heart as well. A lot of my really close mates, Manchester, worked with Reclaim, for example, too. And all it goes to show you, is that yes, the funding landscape is really difficult. Those are all organisations doing outstanding work. and really sort of, for example, Reclaim's really pushing the boundaries actually, and no one was talking about class and politics the way they were. It was truly exceptional stuff. But I think that there is definitely lessons for all of us in terms of the speed at which we're going to have to adapt. I think all organisations know that we've got to adapt, but I think it's just the pace at which we're going to have to. That's what last year showed us. So the thing that we're doing, and it's the thing that I think other youth charities across the country are starting to think of, is there another offer that is in line with your charitable goals and charitable mission that diversifies your income beyond foundations and trusts? And as a new sort of CEO coming in last year, that was my main sort of big focus. And I knew that for me, that was really rooted in our squad. So if we could get our squad and we could really build it up, are there innovative ways that we can cut down on costs, but also potentially have a bigger route to expansion? So one thing that we were doing as sort of a grassroots smaller charity was we were sending our team across the country to deliver democracy cafes. Now, what happens if we change that model slightly? That we, for example, train up our young leaders to deliver democracy cafes across the country. Not only do you keep that peer-to-peer piece, you save on travel, but also those young people gain incredible experience and you can scale it up really quickly. That was a really, hopefully a really positive, we're putting it into practice as we speak, model of just shifting it slightly to put the emphasis on the young people, training them up and putting the systems in place from a safeguarding perspective to make sure that they're ready to go and they can actually deliver the charitable goals with you and get paid to do so. So our model is going to be stay lean as a charity, but think about how you can utilize the young leaders to also help deliver that work and pay them. As a young advocate myself and who's worked with organisations, I know that offer is a really positive one for young people. Young people want to contribute to the charitable mission, but they also want to be paid and they deserve to be paid. And if you can combine that within your model, that becomes really exciting. Stay lean, but also make sure that your organisation can pay the young people to help deliver that work. That's just one model that we're doing that really happy to talk to other organisations about that. The second bit is that corporate offer, right? And it's thinking, does your charity have something there from a subscription model or an insights and data and insights or engagement with young people that works, that is effective, that's in line with your charitable missions, and you can put as a sales pitch, right? Just to be bluntly honest, I think we're at that stage now where that diversification of income is becoming really important. So is there a way that you can use the models that you have, turn it into a package, whether that's focus grouping, whether that is creating, one of my favorite charities is 93% Club, for example, who are very much looking at young people and social mobility and careers, but they're making sure that they really value their, the staff time, staff cost by saying, look, these big law firms, you commission us to help you improve your accessibility. And I think that's the future, is thinking about what's the charity doing really well and what's that value add for corporations, for government, for local government, etc. Again, I'd really encourage charities to use that design thinking model to think about that, because I think it's a pace that we're not used to, that we're going to have to adjust to. And I think if there's any lessons from last year, and I'm glad to see the British Youth Council getting back on its feet with the National Youth Agency, which is great. I think that what last year showed us was that pace of change is going to have to go quicker.
And I know we've done a lot of discussion about youth charities and youth democracy charities specifically, but I think there's definitely lessons that every charity at the moment is feeling the squeeze, right? So there are lessons there that every charity can take, that need to stay agile, that need to diversify your funding streams, that need to engage with corporates. That's all things that other charities can take away. So thank you for that.
As a final question to you, Dan, you are at the earlier stage of your career, I think it would be fair to say, compared to quite a lot of other guests that we've had on the Third Sector podcast. How has it been for you? You've been in post for a year now, I believe. What's it like being a young charity CEO?
So yeah, as you mentioned, very much at the earlier sort of stages than other CEOs. And it's been such a privilege. I think what's really interesting is that although, being sort of in a professional capacity doing this work now for 2 years, I'm sort of not new to the youth and democracy space, having campaigned since I was about 15 in that and leading sort of big teams up north and then sort of UK wide. And I think a lot of those sort of skills have been really transferable to this CEO role, but nothing prepares you for then stepping into that role and sort of learning on the job, as most CEOs do, and managing such a really high performing team. And I cannot sort of highly commend the team enough. We've got really exciting talent on the team at the minute, ready for a period of growth. Now, as a young person, it's really interesting to come into this sector and sit around the table with other CEOs. I think the conversations we're having today are really exciting, and I think they're ones that I can hopefully use my voice in sort of pushing the sector in that direction of saying, look, we all know that things are changing in the funding landscape. I think that I don't have all the answers, but I know how these younger audiences want to be treated and want to be reached. And I think having that background and being able to come in, often the youngest by quite a bit into those sort of settings, hopefully does add a lot of value to those settings and to those roundtables. But at the same time, also very much acknowledging and learning from other CEOs. So many of whom have been on your podcasts, stepping back and going, okay, well, there are things here that I need to learn. And that's a really interesting sort of intergenerational dialogue of going, yes, I can bring X, Y, and Z to the table, but I definitely need mentorship and support in building these relationships or learning how to navigate this relationship with government or with boards, et cetera, learning from other CEOs and mentors has also been really important. But I think I would love to encourage, and I'm really happy to speak to anyone who is looking at CEOship at sort of a young age. I think that there are going to definitely be times when you walk into those rooms and you're mistaken for the intern. Happened to me last month. Like it's a very regular occurrence where people don't choose you for a question at a roundtable on young people when you are the only one sort of young in that room. These things happen. And I think it's just consistently, my sort of mantra has always been sort of like, show up, smile in your face and just keep going. And I think that I haven't sort of lost that since being a young advocate. There are times when, being patronised sort of to my face, I absolutely stand up for myself and for the team, but you just can't let that get to you. And you just got to keep going. And really excited to hopefully our wins, my life, my saves wins, my wins can hopefully demonstrate that youth-led sort of leadership and co-creation isn't just that nice to have. When done well, that impact piece is really crucial and it's really big and it can be really impressive for the sector. And like I said, we see it in policy making now with this discussion regarding extension of the franchise, 16 to 18-year-olds, often seeing young people as the solution to the issues you're facing. That's the mindset shift we need to have. I might be able to see things, not always, but I might be able to see things around that table in a different lens. Doesn't mean I have all the answers, and my word, other people will have the answers often. But bringing the young people to the table, I think can only be a value add for the sector.
Well, Dan, we're very glad that you showed up, smiled and kept going in the studio today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me.
We hope you enjoyed our discussion with Dan, and that's it for this episode. Next week, we'll be talking about how one funder is stimulating participatory grant making and what needs to happen for others to follow suit. And just before we leave you, a reminder that our listener survey is always open. The link is in the show notes to this and every episode. It takes just a few minutes to complete, and your responses are so useful for us as we plan our pipeline of episodes. From all of us at Third Sector, thank you for listening. Our producers are Jude Owen and Nav Powell.